What's up, everybody? Michael Walsh here. So I want to talk about Peter Yan versus Merab and how I just feel very conflicted about this fight. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not conflicted in terms of my prediction. Like, I'm very comfortably picking Merab to win again. Are there adaptations Yan could make? Yes. Does he have the skills? Yes. Has he looked good in his last several fights? Yes. But ultimately, for one, I'm just not picking anyone to beat Merab. If you saw my Islam versus JDM video where I picked Islam, I mentioned that one of my reasons was that unless you're Merab, I'm not going to pick you to beat any of the top guys from Team Khabib, and that's, it's Khabib himself, that's Islam, that's Umar. Like, unless you're Merab, I'm not picking you to beat those guys. And what you might infer from that is that kind of puts Merab on even a higher pedestal and leaves no one that I would pick to beat him. And I've said in the past that pound for pound, if they were all the same size and all in their primes, if you took every fighter to ever live and matched them up against Merab, I would pick Merab. I'd pick him over GSP, over John Jones, over Volkanovski, over Khabib, over whomever. Now, some of those matches would be close and they'd be very intriguing, but I would ultimately pick Merab. I don't know that anyone has the answer for the unique combination of skills and attributes that he brings to the table. And that includes Peter Yan. Now, Yan is an insanely gifted fighter, so, if anyone could do it, he's on a relatively short list. But nevertheless, I am picking Merab to win this weekend. What I feel conflicted about is not the prediction, but rather just kind of how I feel about it and whom I actually want to win. Because on the one hand, Yan is just plainly the more exciting fighter to watch. He has the more aesthetically pleasing style. He is the striker of the two. He is very well-rounded. I really loved the time when both he and Volkanovski were champion. I really like that archetype, the sort of well-rounded, insanely technical athlete who's kind of ultimately a striker-wrestler hybrid. Both Volk and Yan, lean more towards the striking, but when it comes to their defensive wrestling, their scrambles, and even their offensive wrestling, both are extremely good. They sort of fit that vague TJ Dillashaw, Henry Cejudo kind of mold. It's a rare archetype, but they both kind of fit it. And Peter Yan is just a strange case because, and this whole fight is strange because, it's almost like the battle of the guy who over-delivered, the guy who reached potentials no one ever saw for him early on, against the other guy who kind of fell from grace, the guy who never lived up to his potential. And that's kind of weird to say for someone who was the champion in Peter Yan, but it's true. When Yan was champion, even when he lost the belt and then had the interim with Sandhagen, he lost the belt because of a disqualification. He won the belt in, kind of bullshit circumstances where he fought Jose Aldo, who was coming off a loss. Kind of a bullshit loss, but a loss nevertheless, for a vacant belt. But he looked so good doing it, it was hard to deny Yan's ability. And then for Yan to get disqualified against Sterling whilst kicking the shit out of him, it still felt like he was the champ. And then for him to beat Corey Sandhagen in one of the most awesome, technically brilliant fights you'll ever see, it felt like he was the guy, and it felt like he had this total package. And, many people have said he's the most skilled fighter they've ever seen in the sport. And whether he is or he isn't, he's certainly up there. And since then, it's been largely a decline. He had the close but legitimate loss to Sterling. He had the even closer, more questionable, but I still think, fair enough, loss to O'Malley. And then he gets smashed by Yan. And then it's just been like a redemption arc, but it's not fully fulfilled yet. And even there, his first fight back against Song Yadong, who's also fighting soon against O'Malley, you could just see how anxious he was. Anytime Song fainted a takedown, Yan was just panic sprawling. You could tell he was just he was just having PTSD from the Yan fight. And when he won the decision, you just saw this relief wash over him that he still had it, And it was like Thor in Endgame where he's I'm still worthy. It's it was that sort of reaction. And yeah, he's beaten other people since then. He beat Figueiredo, but and a third person who I'm forgetting. But he's looked very good. And but he's still not where he like should have been. Like it feels like these guys have it's as if like a witch cast a spell on these two guys and they switched careers midway through. Because Merab has the career now that it feels like your Jan was supposed to have had. Like 5 years ago, if you would have looked at Peter Yan, or maybe even just like 3 years ago, if you would have looked at Peter Yan and said like, hey, like, are you going to be shocked if I tell you that in a couple of years he's going to be like he's going to be breaking records. He's going to be approaching Anderson Silva and now Islam Makhachev's like longest win streak in UFC history. He's going to be like entering into like top 5 all-time GOAT status. Like no one's going to know how to beat this dude. Like, are you going to be shocked by that? And I would say, no, of course not. Whereas if you were to take Merab during like the first half of his like run to the title, take him after like his Jose Aldo win or something like that. And if you were to tell me those things about him, I'd be like, really? Like, this guy doesn't seem that good. Or, you take his fight with Marlon Moraes, where he almost gets killed in the first round against a declining Moraes. It didn't look, and he just seemed so obviously flawed, did Merab. And ironically, it's not till their fight with each other that it became obvious what's happening. Because, again, Jan has a close loss to Sterling. He has an even closer loss to O'Malley. And then and it's like, okay, so he could turn that around, right? Like the O'Malley loss was questionable. Whatever. Like he just needs a win or two and he can rematch Sterling and probably win the trilogy, whatever. Like, but when he got destroyed like he did by Merab, like he had to rethink things. And even more so with Merab, where seeing Merab do that to Jan, that was like the eye opener. Because that wasn't even a title fight. It feels like it should have been because of the quality of opponent and the quality of the performance. But, in my head canon, I almost view that as like a title defense or as him winning the belt. But in any case, that was the moment where everyone woke up to what Merab was about and what he could do. And the second time that happened was the Umar win, I think, because a lot of people had him picking O'Malley for stylistic reasons, but a lot of people, myself included, were picking Umar to win. It just seemed like a poisonous matchup, and Umar was the coming man, and Team Khabib, and yada yada. And so it's like really those two performances, the Jan fight and the Umar fight, and now, going forward, everyone's on board with Merab being one of the GOATs. And so again, like, it's just a strange, like, you're kind of like, if you're, for me anyways, like I'm kind of rooting for Jan because it feels like, it almost feels like Merab has like stolen his destiny or something. And, and it would feel good to see the turnaround. It would feel good to see like a guy like Jan finally put it together, or at least put it together again, reclaim what he lost. But it reminds me of Chris Weidman, a guy who was a champion and actually had 3 title defenses at middleweight, which is extremely good, and was undefeated whilst he was doing that, but whom just had who just had this like huge decline after that, and kind of misfortune too, where he's like winning a fight until he gets finished. He's kind of winning the fight against Rockhold until he gets finished. He's kind of winning the fight against Romero. He's kind of winning the fight against Mousasi, against Jacare. Like, he's arguably winning on the cards against all of those dudes until he gets finished, So it's kind of like weird misfortune, and then he just never turns it around. And he gets a win here or there, he submits Kelvin Gastelum, and back when that like meant something, but he never gets it back, and he never lives up to his potential, which again feels weird to say for a defending champion, just like it kind of feels weird to say Jan didn't live up to his potential, even though he was a champion. But it's true nevertheless. That's what happens when someone seems like they could be the GOAT and they don't quite get there. And so again, it would feel good to see Jan get it back. It would feel good to see him suddenly not only be champion again, but like by beating Merab, he'd be not pound for pound number 1, but he'd be ahead of people. He'd be ahead of guys like Khamzat probably. He'd be ahead of guys like Tom Aspinall. Like it'd be a huge surge for him. And you'd really have to, the kind of Lucas Tracy argument of like, if you just kind of treat all of his other losses as wins, he really just has the loss against Merab. And if he can avenge that, he's effectively undefeated. It's like GSP or Stipe avenging their losses, and boom, now he's so great. But like, on the flip side, like, it's difficult to imagine Jan achieving what Merab has. Meaning, even if Jan can somehow win, it's hard to imagine him going on to defend the belt so many times that he's in Merab's kind of category in terms of all-time GOATs, where he's cracking the top 5. And it could happen, but like, would you be shocked if Jan beat Merab and then just lost to Umar, or just lost a rematch to O'Malley? Like, I'm not saying that would happen. I could see him beating both those guys, but like, that could happen, and it would just kind of feel like short-lived. It would almost feel like when Charles Oliveira knocked out Gaethje at UFC 300 and had like the greatest highlight moment in the history of the sport, only to go on and get knocked out by Ilya. Like, it doesn't destroy what was done at 300, but it would have felt better almost if Max just like retired. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying he shoulda or that he needed to, but just as far as like keeping that moment feeling like it did, it would have been better if Max just retired. And similarly, like if Jan somehow defeats Merab, that'll be such a high point. But if he just goes on to lose to Umar, I'll be like, what was that for, really? And that's where, like, I've come around on Merab. Like, I was annoyed with his Jose Aldo performance. And even other, like, good performances. Like, I was kind of annoyed with his Henry Cejudo performance, even though it was dominant. But it just felt, like, kind of cheap because Cejudo was old. And I was just like, man, I saw what Cejudo could do in the rematch with Johnson. I just know this is not prime Cejudo. So watching Merab like bully him just kind of felt lame. It was similar to like watching Daniel Cormier bully Dan Henderson, where it's like cool to watch and there's great moments, like watching Cormier slam and trip Dan and watching Merab just pick Henry up over his shoulder and stuff like that is cool, but it also feels like unsportsmanlike almost, and you're just kind of like, man, fuck you. And so, I have come around on Merab in, the last several years, and while he doesn't have the most exciting style ever, it's exciting to watch someone with like a combination of skills and attributes that you've just never seen before. And that's probably never going to be replicated. And that doesn't appear to have any solution. Like, that's cool to see. And it's just cool to see greatness. Just like, Islam's win over JDM wasn't that exciting, but it's just cool to see someone like with a single win, like largely close the gap between him and like number one GOAT status. You know what I mean? Like, that's cool to see. And, so in that sense, I gave you all these reasons why it would feel good for Jan to win, but it would feel good for Merab to win because I kind of want to just keep seeing him win and keep seeing him chase GOAT status. Like, I want to see greatness. And, if we're not going to watch the fights just for the wars, which, if you've been watching my channel a long time, I prefer that. Like, I'd rather watch lower quality fighters have a war than masters have a chess match, because ultimately I care more about this whole thing, this whole circus, as a fight than I do as a sport. But nevertheless, since we're talking about, the champions, we're talking about the best people in the world, we're talking about the GOATs, like, in that level, like, I care more then about seeing greatness than I do about seeing a more enjoyable style. So I'd rather kind of see Merab just keep winning, keep getting title defenses, keep closing the gap between him and Islam and GSP and the guys ahead of him on the GOAT list. I'd kind of like to just see that ball keep rolling more than I would like the short-term feel-good story of Jan getting it back. But, so yeah, like, ultimately, like, while conflicted, I'm kind of rooting for Merab, which feels weird to say, but like, but I am still conflicted. I don't feel just totally, if Merab does it again, if Merab just smashes him, if Merab finishes him this time, I'll feel conflicted. On the one hand, I'll feel like that was awesome and like Merab just keeps improving and just, wow, what a thing to witness. On the flip side, I'll feel bad because I'll be like, man, such a tragic story for Peter Yan, just the guy who, this guy with the potential, but who just never quite got there. And that's sad to see. Yeah. So that's what I've got on that.